And a good morning to you from the Teach Every Nation campus here in Limpopo. We have an educator summit with leaders from Asia, Africa, and North America. And we've come together to discover how can we best scale our teaching to reach the pastors in the global South. And we are collaborating with the South African Theological Seminary, and we blended formal theological training with our informal curriculum, or non-formal curriculum, I should say. And we have been showing how in the micro seminary, we work together. We were at Lausanne last year and we signed an agreement, a covenant of sorts, that we will work with one another in the body of Christ. And what a joy it is to do it. And now we want to extend that collaboration with many, many Bible schools and seminaries. So this morning, we're going to be talking about the fascinating topic of artificial intelligence. 2-3 years ago, we had many goals in our Teach Every Nation vision that was truly aspirational, but was tactically not very feasible. So when we discovered that artificial intelligence could do things faster, with more quality, and with less cost, we were really interested. And we came up with a slogan in 2024 for our team: prayerful multiplication through teamwork and technology. A dream without a team is a nightmare, but exponential goals without technology is also a pipe dream. It's not going to happen. So we were very intrigued. So I spoke to our founder, Dr. Bruce Wilkinson, and he bought into it because we really want to do things, and we want to do it not in this next generation. We have goals that we want to happen in months and years that were not decades from now. So we enrolled in a course with MIT on artificial intelligence. We got our core team, collaborators, and 27 of us enrolled. MIT told us that that was the biggest enrollment of any organization in their most popular course. And what happens if you do it with everyone? You have a culture shift. And in the last 18 months, we have implemented artificial intelligence in so many of our departments, thinking, collaboration, and how we do translations. Wow. How we do visualization. Wow. How we do problem solving, budgeting, communication. It has impacted every department. And so we want to share with our deans around the world. When we start Bible schools around the world, we hope to start 160,000. We take every country, divide its population by 50,000. That's how many Bible schools we want to plant through local churches. And we call the pastor that we train in Bible School on Wheels a dean. And we want to bless the dean with that he or she could have the life-changing material, but also give the person tools to do ministry in general in an accelerated way. And so may the blessing of the power of artificial intelligence, we want to spread this out to many of you. Now, I got to know many of you at the ISET conference in Albania. And 2 years before that, I'm reacquainted with Kevin Smith, the president of South African Theological Seminary. And we started working and thinking, how can we merge formal and non-formal to scale to the need of the continent and to the global South? And so he is showing our new educator friends, presidents and deans from many seminaries and Bible schools this week here on the campus, many things. But I asked Kevin, who's a very clear thinker, respect him a lot, to share with us 4 sessions on artificial intelligence, particularly with this audience, how it relates to education. Because remember, the Christian mission, the Great Commission, is an educational mission, not just the evangelistic mission. Matthew 28, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them, and then the words where Teach Every Nation focuses, teach them to obey. And that is what the goal is of South African Theological Seminary. It's not just content. They want transformational teaching to their students. and they are wrestling through what it means, this new technology, for formal education, just as we are applying it to the non-formal. So may these next 4 sessions truly encourage, inspire you, and may it give you some introductions on how to use artificial intelligence productively, with integrity, and may it bless your ministry. Let's give our speaker for this morning, Dr. Kevin Smith, a big welcome. Kevin, welcome. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks, Martin. Good morning, everybody. My task is to reflect on artificial intelligence in higher education. I'm sure all of us are already using some dimension of artificial intelligence, but what exactly is it? And how does it work? And how does the way it works impact the way that we think about its implications for education? I have been both incredibly excited and terrified at the technology changes and their implications for, at least for us as an institution. But the more I think about it, the more excited I feel. The more I feel like there's opportunity here to do things with excellence, but to do them differently to the way that we've ever done them before. We live in a world that is never going to be the same as it was 3 years ago because of revolutionary technology. So what is AI? I want you to imagine a master storyteller. This storyteller has read every story that's ever been written and committed those stories to memory. He has mastered the style of storytelling. He's mastered every kind of character, every kind of plot line, every kind of narrative technique, processed this through internalizing every story ever written. And a little girl comes to him and asks him to tell her a story about a black stallion. What our master storyteller does is he doesn't go into the archive of his library and find a story about a stallion. Rather, what he does is to draw on everything that's been internalized through this enormous library of information that he's committed to memory. And he makes up a new story. A story that follows the patterns, the style, the kind of characters that you would expect to find in a children's story about a black stallion. He draws on the patterns that he's seen millions of times, and he makes a new story compelling, patterned after everything that he's been exposed to, but without copying or drawing from that information directly. That, to some extent, is what generative AI does. And we're going to unpack some of that this morning. So you're likely using AI tools every day. You may not even be aware of some of the tools that you're using because they're embedded into the other software programs that you're working with. But you're likely using them all the time. However, you may or may not know how they actually work. And I'm not going to assume that we all know exactly how they work. So the goal for this session is to unpack some of the basics of how this revolutionary technology of AI works. Now, I am not a tech expert. I am a Bible teacher and a theologian by passion who's immersed in a world where we are using these things. And I'm going to try and explain this to you in hopefully language that's accessible to us. Sometimes if you get a tech person to explain tech stuff, you leave none the wiser. So hopefully we can do a little bit better than that. We're going to talk about 3 things. Firstly, pattern prediction. And then we're going to talk about adaptive communication. And lastly, we're going to talk about generative hallucinations. So 3 dimensions of what this AI does as we engage with it. So the first is that AI is essentially patterned prediction. It's patterned prediction. So artificial intelligence, AI stands for artificial intelligence. Intelligence, according to Professor Gardner, is the ability to solve problems or create products that are useful. Intelligence is the ability to solve problems or create products that are useful. And this has largely been associated with things that only human beings can do. So intelligence, at least on Earth, is essentially a human trait. It's the ability to solve problems and create useful products. But over the last while, something fundamental has shifted. We are no longer the only entities on Earth that can solve problems and create useful products. So something that has historically been the exclusive reserve and domain of human beings is now mimicked by machines, by computers. And that's what artificial intelligence is. Artificial intelligence is machines acting in ways that seem intelligent, in ways that mimic human intelligence, doing things that previously only we could do. Now, in years gone by, if programmers wanted to train a machine to do something, they used to program it with a set of rules. So you would train the machine with the rules. Think of how translation works. If you were trying, and this is how old translation software used to work, you would try to input into the computer all the rules of the source and receptor language. So if I wanted to do it from biblical Greek into English, I would have to put into the machine all the rules of Greek grammar and vocabulary, and then I'd put in all the English rules and grammar. And what I was hoping was that the machine could apply the rules to produce a sensible translation. We tried it in about 2007. We got what was then the state-of-the-art translation software, and we translated some of our material into a number of languages, including Spanish. And then we back-translated it into English, and it had some hilarious outcomes. So the Holy Spirit became holy alcohol. So the rule-based thing was fraught with challenges. What they do now is they no longer try and put rules into the computer. What you do now is you take the entire human knowledge database, as much as you can get your hands on, and you dump it into the machine. So the machine literally reads everything that's available. And then it begins to recognize patterns in the data. And so it trains itself to recognize that this Greek expression would probably be said this way in English or Afrikaans. Previously, if you wanted to train the machine to recognize a cat, you would tell it what a cat is. It's a demon-possessed creature with pointed ears and fur and a tail, etc. Best fed to the crocodiles on the 10 campus. And then you would hope that based on the input data, the machine would be able to recognize a cat. But it doesn't work very well. So you know what they do now? You upload thousands of pictures with cats in them. And the pictures are tagged. So every picture that has a cat in is tagged. And when the machine has seen thousands and thousands of images with cats, it begins to recognize what a cat is. But not only to recognize it, it now begins to have the ability to create a new picture with a cat in it, not by going into its database and drawing out one of the images that was captured. It creates an entirely new image based on the characteristics of 1 million cats that it's seen. That's exactly how you and I learned to recognize objects in the real world. We learned by seeing them again and again and again, and eventually internalizing the characteristics of them. So this is known as machine learning. Machine learning is the whole idea that you can input into the machine an enormous amount of data, and the machine will begin to identify recurring patterns in that data, whether it's language patterns or images or just about anything else. The machine internalizes that, and that is the foundation on which this modern generative AI is based. It's based on machine learning. So the machine is fed or trained on pretty much the largest knowledge base you can imagine. Imagine feeding it with the entire internet, every book you can get your hands on, and it internalizes all of that. It learns language patterns, it learns content, it learns which things go together and how they flow and work together. And then when you come and you ask it a question called a prompt in AI language, when you go onto an AI machine and you ask it a question, your question becomes a kind of context. And it now draws on its entire training knowledge base, and it looks for responses that would fit the pattern of the thing that you're asking it. And then it uses a technique, it's on steroids. It's basically a technique called next word prediction. But it's taken it to the next level. So it then imagines, well, what would you say in response to this question? What kind of response would you give? And it would imagine each next word called a token, each next word in a sequence. But not only the next word, it would also imagine the kind of genre and style and illustrations. Where's it getting that? It's getting it from having seen millions of similar kinds of inputs and responses, and it creates a new response by predicting the next word and the next word and the next word and the next word. And how much it actually understands of what it's telling you is up for grabs. But it's essentially next word prediction. What's critical here is that when you ask an AI a question, it's not going to look up the Encyclopedia Britannica and draw out a response. It's got all of that data memorized as mathematical patterns. And then it produces a new response that matches the pattern of the kind of thing that you're asking it to tell you. But that response is completely new. So that's the tricky part of understanding what it's actually doing. It's predicting, in this context, what is the next word or sentence that would make sense based on all English knowledge that I've ever seen, and rinsing and repeating that process. So it's prediction on steroids. The second characteristic of AI I want to mention this morning is adaptive communication. Has anybody noticed that your AI seems to know what you like? So my ChatGPT bot has figured out that I'm an evangelical Christian, that I positively detest liberal theological scholarship, and that I have all kinds of idiosyncrasies, and it feeds me a steady diet of stuff. Man, if you can read my conversations with ChatGPT, you would be convinced that thing is a Christian. It's a born-again fellow brother in Christ. You'd be absolutely convinced. Because everything it says to me mimics that. Is ChatGPT Christian? Not at all. So every time you interact with it, it's building up a picture of who you are. It's building up a kind of memory of who you are, what your worldview is, what you like, what you're interested in, what kinds of response you like. So mine has figured out these idiosyncrasies that I have. And then when it goes and draws, now ask it a question, right? Now it's going to go and draw from all the knowledge that's been captured into it and try and frame a patterned response. Because it knows I'm an evangelical Christian, it's going to go and favor the patterns of response that are common amongst evangelical sources. If it knew I was a Muslim, it would go and favor the patterns of the kinds of responses that would be common from Islamic sources. So the Muslim is sure ChatGPT is a Muslim. So here's a little exercise. Who is Jesus? I got it to answer me from a few perspectives. So when it's answering an evangelical Christian, Jesus is the Son of God, fully man. Sounds a lot like the Apostles' Creed type response. And then I said, all right, now I'm a higher critic, critical scholar. And I get a completely different response. Why? Because that's the pattern of responses that happen in that segment of academia. So it's drawing from different patterns of response based on who it thinks it's talking to. And then I asked it the same question, but now I'm a Muslim. And now it's going to draw its response from the patterns of response that you're going to commonly get in Quranic and Islamic sources. So you get three completely different answers to the question, who is Jesus, or any other question for that matter, based on your idiosyncrasy. So what's going on here? Is the AI fickle? Is it having you on? Not at all. It's one model with many voices. So when the AI model is trained, it's not trained to speak Kevin. It's trained with a plethora of data that includes evangelical, critical, Islamic, and every other perspective you can imagine on who Jesus is. But then as it figures out who it's talking to, it favors the patterns of response that match the way that you frame your interest. So its vast training data includes all those perspectives on Jesus and many more. And as it gets to know you, it patterns its response on your interests, needs, and idiosyncrasies. So in other words, your AI is like your guide dog. If you train it well, it'll serve you well. And if you don't train it well, it'll give you random answers. That has implications for students. It's very good at giving you Bible-believing responses if it knows that that's the pattern and perspective from which you want your questions answered. And the last thing we need to talk about as a brief introduction to AI is this whole thing of generative hallucination. So hallucination in AI speak is the term that when a model produces an output, that output may be fluent, confident, and plausible sounding and completely fictional. Completely wrong. So sometimes the AI will produce an answer that sounds absolutely convincing. It's clear, coherent, convincing, etc., and it's completely wrong or completely fictional. And the better you know your subject matter on a particular topic, the more likely you are to recognize that. So why does that happen? I'm so glad you asked. I was going to tell you anyway. When the AI answers your question, it doesn't go into a library of stored data and look up the answer and bring you an answer from a book or an article or a resource. That's not what it's doing. What it's doing is finding the patterns of response that would match the prompt that you've given it. And then it's using a kind of advanced next word prediction to frame a response that seems to match the same pattern as the kinds of response that you would expect to that kind of question. Now, if its training data on the question you asked was thin or inconsistent or missing, the AI will still give you an answer. What it's going to give you is often a smooth guess. Sounds very plausible, it sounds smooth, but it's just guessing. It's guessing because it never likes to admit that it doesn't know something. Not unlike us, I suppose. The AI is trained not only to generate language, but also to satisfy user prompts. So it's biased towards sounding like it knows the answer even if it doesn't, and therefore it generates a response, and that response may contain fiction. It doesn't fact check whether its answer is right. That's critically important. It's not fact checking. So if it tells you that Hugh Huisson wrote this book, it can't fact check that. It's just a pattern of response. So imagine a really clever student taking an examination, and there's a question in the examination. If the student knows the answer, they're going to answer it factually, aren't they? Because they know the answer. If the student doesn't know the answer, they're very seldom going to write on the exam, "I don't know." They're much more likely to try and piece together some semi-plausible, coherent-sounding fiction from the bits of data that they might have and give you something in the hope that maybe there's some merit to that. They're not deliberately lying. They're trying to be helpful under pressure. That's exactly what AI does. But sometimes it gives you fictions. So these hallucinations are not bugs in the sense of the AI failing to do what it's designed and intended to do. They are natural consequence of a system that is designed to produce fluent text, not to verify facts. It's not designed to verify facts. It's designed to produce plausible sounding outputs that fit the patterns of normal human processing. So we've arrived at real artificial intelligence. Machines now act with human-like intelligence that they couldn't do a few years ago. When the field of AI was beginning, the acid test that was initially proposed was that if you could have a conversation with a machine for 5 minutes and not know it was a machine, that you had arrived in terms of artificial intelligence. We're just about there. And it's amazing technology, both terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. I think it's the biggest technological advance and transformation in society, certainly in my lifetime, and I was born before cell phones and before Google and all of those sorts of things. And it has huge implications for higher education. In our next few sessions, we're going to unpack some of those.